Hello and welcome to the introduction of the Bible Yogi channel. Today I'm going to be covering the Bible. Basically, this is an overview of the Bible, just for presumably beginners to reading the Bible. First off, you need to understand that the Bible is split into two major books, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is the religious canon of the Jews, and the New Testament is the religious canon of the Christianity. In the Old Testament, we have such characters as Moses and King David, and in the New Testament, we have Jesus and the Apostle Paul as the central figures. In the Old Testament, it's divided up into 37 books. Those books can be categorized in the following manner. The first 5 books are known as the Pentateuch, also known to the Jews as the Torah. These are the books of Moses. Then we have the Old Testament history, which consists of Joshua, Judges, and then the books of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. These are historical books that talk about history during the times of the Babylonian occupation and the Assyrian occupation and other trials of the Jewish nation. The Old Testament minor history, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, are specific stories in dealing with the rebuilding of the nation of Israel following their occupation. Next, we have the books of poetry and wisdom, the book of Job, Psalms written by King David, Proverbs written presumably by King Solomon, and the same thing of Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. Next, we have the major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Isaiah primarily deals with messianic prophecies, and then Jeremiah is a doom and gloom preacher for the Israeli nation during, I believe it was the Babylonian Empire. Next, we have the minor prophets, who are also prophets that have had warnings for the children of Israel. Moving on to the New Testament, we have the first 4 books are just the Gospels, and they are believed to be first-hand accounts of the life of Christ. The first 3 are called the Synoptic Gospels, and then the book of John is a slight deviation from those 3. We'll talk about how in a minute. Then we have the Acts of the Apostles. Then we have the Pauline letters of the Apostle Paul. He wrote quite a bit of the New Testament. Next, we have other apostolic letters written by James, Peter, and John, and Jude. And finally, what I like to refer to as the final exam of the Bible, the Book of Revelation. And here I'm being a little bit cute by calling it the Revelation of St. John the Divine. This is the name of the book as by the King James Bible. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, a little bit more detail. This part, I'm hoping that you'll identify or you'll know some of the stories already, and maybe you don't know that they came from the Bible in the first place, such as the creation story, Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, for example, when God invented the rainbow. That's all in the book of Genesis. Lots of interesting stories in the book of Genesis, including the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and stuff like that. The book of Exodus, which is the story of Moses, and the Exodus means to depart from, and it's basically the God's rescue of the children of Israel from slavery in the land of Egypt. It's a fascinating book. We're going to cover it in more detail later, but you may have heard of stories such as the burning bush, the parting of the Red Sea, the 10 Commandments, the plagues on Egypt. Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, is essentially the law and religious rituals are outlined there. The book of Numbers, which is commonly believed to be one of the driest books of the Bible, but it's actually very interesting from a historical standpoint because it gives a near complete genealogy of every family that came out of the land of Egypt with Moses, and then their descendants are who became the land of Israel. Deuteronomy is kind of like a cliff notes of the other four books, and it's also Moses' death is recorded in the book of Deuteronomy and his parting thoughts as he, went to heaven. Next, the Old Testament history. There's lots of stories that you probably have heard and maybe weren't aware of where they came from. For example, Gideon. The Gideon Society is that society that puts all those Bibles in all those hotel rooms. And the story of Gideon is in the book of Judges. Same thing with Samson and Delilah. You may have heard about the man who had really long hair and super strength, and then Delilah deceived him and got him to cut his hair, and then he got defeated and became enslaved by the Philistines. That's in the book of Judges. Now, Ruth is a real tiny book. It's only 4 pages long, and we're going to cover that later, but she was the 31st great-grandmother of Jesus. So it's pretty amazing to be able to trace your genealogy back 31 generations. My wife is a genealogist, and 31 is just an amazing length of time, something like 3,000 years. David and Goliath, King David, that was in the book of 1 Samuel. Also, the Witch of Endor is in the book of 1 Samuel. 2 Samuel covers more of David's life, including his meeting with Bathsheba, his affair with Bathsheba. 1 Kings covers the story of King Solomon, the richest and wisest king ever to rule the world, or rule a country, rule Israel. He built the temple, and the Ark of the Covenant. That's from the back in Deuteronomy. You probably have heard of that from the Indiana Jones movies. In 1 Kings, King Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, and then it also highlights Elijah, the prophet where he was taken up into heaven by the chariots of fire, and that's in 2 Kings. Elisha and the siege of Jerusalem. Old Testament minor history. The book of Esther is a fascinating study of just God's intervention in the lives of specific Jewish people, Esther and Mordecai. It's a great story. We'll cover that in some time. Job, you've heard of that, the long suffering of Job. You've all, the parable or the proverb is the patience of Job. You've heard that, I'm sure. The Psalms of David include Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Proverbs, the Wisdom of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes. I'm sure you've heard of that book from the song by the Byrds, Turn, Turn, Turn. For everything there is a season. Turn, turn, turn. The major prophets, Isaiah, the Messianic prophecies, end times, and Daniel, Daniel in the lion's den, the writing on the wall. You've heard that expression. That's from the book of Daniel. In Ezekiel, I didn't want to pass that by, but got excited about Daniel. Has the fields of bones. It's one of the coolest stories I've ever read, and it's Ezekiel chapter 37, if you want to jump ahead and go read it. But it's a vision that Ezekiel had, and it's an amazing vision. It's crazy. Daniel also had the first visions of the beasts. So we'll go over that in some detail later. The minor prophets, they add more texture and more prophecy to the book of Kings and Chronicles. So they were the prophets during those times of all those kings. Which brings us to the New Testament. I mentioned the Synoptic Bibles are the 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the reason why they're called the Synoptic is because they overlap a little bit, if not a lot. This chart here I got from Wikipedia. And as you can see, they have these things called double tradition if it's in Luke and Matthew. And then it's called triple tradition if it's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then they have other, just a very small percentage is in Mark and Luke. Very small is unique to Mark, etc. But anyway, that's the overlap between those three. 20% is unique in Matthew and 35% unique in Luke. The book of John is not included in this relationship because much of it is unique. But you'll see all four of these gospels, they paint the same picture of who Christ was. And that's the whole purpose of this channel, is to discover who Jesus Christ really was. The early church history was in the Acts of the Apostles. That's when the Spirit fell on the day of Pentecost, and then Stephen was martyred, and then Paul had his vision and became the Apostle Paul, who ended up writing most of the New Testament, including all of these books. Of course, Corinthians is listed twice because I forgot to put 1st and 2nd there, but that's what that means. 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Other apostles also contributed to the New Testament: James, Peter, John, and Jude. And finally, like I said before, the final exam of the Bible, the book of Revelation, which I can't wait to get into lots of detail. There's so much of that book that I have no clue what they're talking about, but so much of it I do. And what I do understand and believe, it doesn't jive with a lot of the Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth. A little bit of a spoiler there. But anyway, that is my introduction to the Bible. The takeaway is the Old Testament's for the Jews, the New Testament was for the Christians, although Christians get a lot of inspiration from the Old Testament also. After all, the Old Testament is what pointed to Christ. And we're going to cover prophecies and how they all do point to Christ, and some of the more amazing prophecies that are back there, and the nature of prophecy I will also cover. So with that, thank you for listening to the first introduction to the Bible on the Bible Yogi channel. Till next time.